Good evening. I'm Noel Lateef, President of the Foreign Policy Association. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this inaugural lecture with Roger Martin in FPA's Game Changers lecture series, which brings to our forum unique individuals who are able to see the world with new eyes. We're delighted to be co-sponsoring the lecture series, this particular lecture, with the Canadian Consulate General, and I particularly want to acknowledge Dan Sullivan, Canada's outstanding Consul General in New York. Where's Dan? We should get him to stand up. Yeah, he's sitting typically very modestly in the very back of the room. Jim Doherty, a director of the Foreign Policy Association and a partner in the private equity firm Great Hill Partners, based in Boston, will formally introduce our speaker. Jim?
Thank you very much. I literally just whipped in. My plane was an hour and a half late, so I apologize if I was responsible for more drinks being consumed or whatever happened. I'm not sure what was going on. So thank you very much for having me. I've actually been a director at the Foreign Policy Association now for, do you remember, Mary, how many years? Mary was in college. It was a long time ago. And it's been a pleasure. And this is a wonderful new series, and I'm glad that we keep innovating here at the FPA and coming up with new ideas and trying new things. So I'm thankful for Noel and the rest of the board for being very active in that regard. We have the honor tonight of having Roger Martin come and speak to us here. He is the Dean of the Joseph L. Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. He was a director at Monitor Corporation, which is based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right around the corner from where I live. Was there 2 days ago. Did you ever live there, actually? No? Oh, you did for a long time?
16 years.
Oh, then we'll compare notes. Did you become a Red Sox fan?
Yes.
There you go.
More a Celtics fan, to be honest.
Okay, well, you're happy these days.
Yes.
There you go. He founded, during his 13 years at Monitor, he founded and chaired Monitor University, which is the firm's educational arm, and served as the firm's co-head of the firm for 2 years and founded the Canadian subsidiary. He is currently on the Ontario Task Force for Competitiveness, Productivity, and Economic Progress, and is a director here at Thomson Reuters and at the Canadian Credit Management Foundation. Wow, that's a lot. So without any more, from my mouth, we'll introduce Mr. Martin. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, the warm welcome. It's terrific to be here in one of my absolutely favorite places to be in the world, and of course, being a Thomson Reuters director, it's always nice to be back in this building. Let me tell you a little bit about the origins of the study that I'm going to talk about, which is a study that the Premier of Ontario, our governor equivalent, asked myself and a fellow named Richard Florida, who's an urban geographer who's also at the Rotman School, an American who joined the Rotman School a couple of years ago, asked us to undertake this study of the long-term future of Ontario, the changing composition of the economy and of the workforce of the economy, and how that's going to influence Ontario going forward, and to give him recommendations on how to make sure we have a very prosperous economy in the long term. And that was last March, and so we've been working away at it ever since. And what I will strive to do today is something we just released a report last week, and I think there were copies available. That's an Ontario-based study where we compared Ontario to similar jurisdictions in the U.S. For this talk tonight, what we've done is Canadianized everything, and we'll make the comparisons between Canada and the U.S. On a number of dimensions rather than Ontario. So I've modified things a little bit. 3 things I want to talk about, which is what's happening in this creative age, and both the promise and the challenge, what we have to do in Canada, and what I would argue other jurisdictions need to do to take advantage of the promise and not fall prey to the challenges, and what the agenda is for Ontario that we came up with. So one of the things that I think people understand, but I'm not sure they understand entirely the magnitude of the change, is that there's been this dramatic change in the composition of jobs in our economy. And these are the Canadian numbers. The American numbers are quite similar to this, but I think if you would have actually told told Canadians or Americans at the turn of the 20th century that there were only going to be 3% of people working in all the resource industries combined, they would have been fairly stunned, given that at the turn of the 20th century, nearly half, 46% of the economy was engaged in that. So you can see that top block has gone from half the economy to almost nothing. You can see that what we've characterized three kinds of jobs as routine jobs: routine service, routine physical, routine resource, as compared to creativity-oriented jobs. And this is an important distinction that we think we need to understand about the economy. What is changing is the rise of creativity-oriented jobs that actually take lots of judgment and decision-making, that are autonomous, and require analytical and social intelligence skills of the sort that are not required in a vast proportion of the other jobs in the economy, which are more routine. They're algorithmic. Somebody gives the person in charge of the job the instructions, and by and large, they follow those instructions. Think of it as a routine physical job is the kind of job that we see in factories on an assembly line. A routine service job is a payables or receivables clerk or a waiter or waitress following through with not a whole lot of autonomy. And what's the good news about the economy that's changing is that absolutely dominated the economy 100 years ago. If we look at all the occupations, and we've categorized them into these four buckets, there were only 4% of the entire economy were those jobs in Canada in 1901. And as of 2006, the last year we have stats for this, that number is up to 29%. So that's the huge growth in creativity-oriented jobs. And in fact, the number in America is a little bit higher. It started at the same level and is at 36% in creativity-oriented jobs. The other transformation that you can see that has happened is what's happened to physical-oriented jobs that are typically in the manufacturing sector, but can be in others, as opposed to service-oriented jobs. Those service jobs have gone in Canada from 12% of the economy to 46% of the economy, while the physically oriented jobs have gone from 38 to 22. So almost a halving of those jobs. And lots of people worry about the decline in manufacturing, and you'll hear stories about manufacturing jobs declining. That is an inexorable decline, I would argue, in developed economies. You would see a similar chart for all OECD countries. 30 developed countries in the world would all have this kind of decline in manufacturing-oriented jobs. So and the reason is not we're manufacturing less. So Canada is manufacturing more with 22% of the workforce in manufacturing-oriented jobs than it was with 38%. That's because productivity has grown so quickly. And what's happening in the future? If we look forward, and estimates are made by folks who study where the jobs are coming from, the picture is of a more creativity-oriented economy in the future. So of all the jobs that are going to be created in the next 10 years, in Canada, 53% of them are going to be creativity-oriented jobs. And you can see very few jobs were created in the routine physical domain, and more in the routine service-oriented domain. In the U.S., the numbers are lower for creativity-oriented, and that may be for two reasons. One is that two different groups have done these estimates, a group in Canada versus a group in the U.S., so you have to take them with a grain of salt. They may as far as we can tell, they're done in a similar fashion, but there may be differences. But the other thing, of course, is America has gone to creativity-oriented jobs faster than Canada, and might be a reflection of the fact that they've moved more quickly on that front. But what it means is that this economy is going to get more creativity-oriented, both of our economies, going forward than now, because both of those numbers are considerably higher than the base. And back to services versus goods, if we just break the economy into services producing versus goods producing, as opposed to occupations, which was the earlier chart, you can see the dramatic shift. So in 1946, from Canada being 60% goods, 40% services, to 77% goods or services and 23% goods. And again, the American numbers are similar. It's 21% is a similar number for goods for America. And the only thing that's slightly different is America went a little bit more quickly. There was a quicker decline in the 60s and 70s than there was in Canada for the goods producing sector. So as I say, lots of people think services is bad because it's flipping burgers at McDonald's. It is not. Service jobs are not less attractive than manufacturing jobs, and attempting to keep manufacturing big in the economy is something that doesn't work and won't work. And much of it is classification oriented. So when a big company outsources its IT to EDS or IBM Global Services, and it's 1,000 or 5,000 workers transfer over to EDS or IBM Global Services, they are treated as if they've moved from a manufacturing company to a service company. And we've lost manufacturing jobs when it's the same people doing exactly the same job. So the disaggregation of corporations has resulted in a more service-intensive economy. So what do we have to think about in terms of taking advantage of this shift to a more creativity-oriented economy, and what are the challenges and problems? A few things I'd say. So we've done this sort of gruesome analysis of all the major occupational classifications, 800 of them, and what kind of skills are required. You can break down the skills required for these various occupations into these three buckets: analytical skills, social intelligence skills, and physical skills. And you can just see representative occupations on that. So physical skills, firefighters are high, lawyers are low, analytical skills, surgeons are high, and pile drive operators are low. And lo and behold, social intelligence skills of CEOs are high. I would have never guessed. No, no, I'm just kidding. And there's some interesting things happening with respect to these skills. So one of the questions is, does it matter? How much does it matter if the occupation you're involved in has a low requirement for analytical skills versus a high requirement for analytical skills? So if you're low on that versus high, let's say you're at the 25th percentile versus the 75th percentile, that is consistent with an increase in earnings, per annual earnings of $15,200. So a fairly big ramp up for being in a job that has higher analytical skills. And you'd think in the modern economy that those would be the most important and highest payoff skills, but they're not, and not actually even close. So in this new economy, it's the social intelligence skills that actually have the biggest ramp up. So $25,000 positive from moving from the 25th percentile to the 75th percentile on that dimension, which I think is an interesting challenge, frankly, for the educational system, because the school that I'm involved in would spend most of its time doing what, do you think? Increasing analytical skills, teaching an analytical tool set, even though, of course, lots of the companies hiring will tell us it's people skills that are important. And so the data now are convincingly clear on that question. And then physical skills, you can see the economy has gone away from physical skills. So if you go from a low physical skill requirement job to a high physical skill requirement job, you can expect that your earnings capacity will go down, not up. And so this is sort of a picture of the creative economy. Which is an economy that rewards analytical and social intelligence skills more, and physical skills not at all. Now, here are the differences, some of the difference between the Canadian economy and the U.S. economy. Interesting picture. So The U.S. economy is an economy where both analytical skills and social intelligence skills and increases therein are rewarded significantly more highly than in Canada. And the punishment for jobs that involve physical skills, that are physical skill intensive, is greater. And this is a generalized, I would argue, picture of the Canadian economy versus the U.S. economy. The Canadian economy is attenuated versus the U.S. economy. All the same things happen, but happen to a lesser extent. Is the way I've come as I've studied for now 8 years Canada versus the U.S. and all of these economic dimensions. That's the big difference. Now, there's some good things about that and some not so good things about that, and we're probably experiencing some of that now. The other way to look at industries. So thus far, I've looked at them in terms of the skills and the occupations. The other way to look at the economy is whether you're looking at an industry that is clustered or dispersed. And you can think of industries as having those two features. Clustered industries are industries where if you went across America and asked by postal code or by county, do you have similar numbers of jobs in a given industry across all the counties in America? Or do you have some counties that have a whole lot of jobs in an industry and some counties that have very few? The former are dispersed industries, where same in all counties. The latter are clustered industries. So, if you ask movie making and ask, is movie making spread seamlessly across America? No, you'd find that there's employment in certain places and not others. If you look at software, the same thing. If you look at aircraft manufacture, the same thing. Those industries are much more productive and higher wage. Why? Because they can grow to great scale, because they serve a region outside their local region. Whereas dispersed industries, like your local hair salon, your local gardener, local TV stations, local newspapers, you find them everywhere across the country. And it turns out that, as I'll show you, the wages and productivity and innovation are much higher in those clustered industries. And you can see from this chart that the creativity-oriented jobs are much more plentiful and a bigger piece of the puzzle in those clustered industries. And since the clustered industries are a little more manufacturing-oriented, you see there's a bigger chunk of physical jobs in those industries as well. And if you then ask the question, what's the payoff to being in a clustered industry? You can see it's quite huge. So if you work in an industry that's clustered, and again, if you work in New York and you work in the publishing business or the financial services business, although lately maybe not so much, one of the industries that's highly clustered here, that's the payoff. So that if you're in a routine occupation, you make $38,000 instead of $26,000, and if you're in a creativity-oriented occupation, you make $83,000 instead of $65,000. So the ramp up there is quite substantial. The other thing, though, to start noticing, I think, is with the rise of the creative class, with the rise of creativity-oriented jobs, what you're seeing is a challenge to income distribution. So there's rising inequality in Canada and the United States equally, and a whole lot of that has to do with the rise of these creativity-oriented jobs that pay so much more than the routine-oriented jobs. And what we predict is that this is going to be a trend that is going to continue and become more marked rather than less. Is that as jobs become creativity-oriented and more of them, you're going to have a big class, if you will, of people in those jobs who are earning high salaries, and the routine-oriented jobs are going to lag behind. And back to the attenuation argument, it's going to happen to a greater extent in America than Canada. So here is Canada versus the U.S. across these categories. So are you in a creativity-oriented job in a clustered industry? Your earnings in Canada will be 64% higher than the average employment income across the economy. 89% higher in America. If you're in a routine-oriented job in a dispersed industry, you'll be at 29% lower in Canada, 38% lower in the U.S. And so you can see a picture there of income inequality just in spades, and it's inexorable. Right? It's occupationally driven because you've got that huge difference. And again, those bars, the creativity-oriented bars, are growing and have grown from almost nothing to 36% of the U.S. economy. They're going to get to be a bigger piece of the economy, and it's a greater challenge for issues of income inequality and social cohesion. And here's again the attenuation chart, another attenuation chart. It's a bit of a eye chart, but what it is the 41. It turns out there are 41 clustered industries. You can look at all the clustered industries together. There are 41 of them in the economy, and you can see in the vast majority of them there's a higher component of the creative class, the creativity-intensive, creativity-oriented jobs in the U.S. cluster versus the Canadian cluster, which is that these U.S. industries, right, whether they be aerospace or biopharma or financial services, are more creativity-intensive. They use creative employees to a greater extent than they're used in Canada, which results in higher productivity and higher wages for those clusters. But, of course, then creates the challenge of if you're not in one of those clustered industries, and those clustered industries, by the way, have about 30% of employment. Dispersed industries have about 70%, clustered industries 30%. So you've got this creative class, creativity-oriented jobs 36%, clustered industries 30%, routine jobs, dispersed industries around 70% of the economy, and you've got this 30-70 split with huge income differences. The three things that my colleague Richard Florida talks about in terms of what matters to economy are three things: tolerance, talent, and technology. Tolerance is openness to new ideas, and he uses as a proxy foreign-born as a percentage of the population. And here, Canada does extremely well versus the U.S. But in terms of talent, percentage of the population over 25 with a university degree, the U.S. is considerably higher than Canada. And a big problem in Canada is we have a couple of the big provinces that have very small university sectors, and that brings it down. If you're talking about my home province, Ontario, that number is 24. So a closer number. And then patents, technology. America does a much better job on technology. Last chart associated with the difference again between creativity-oriented and routine-oriented occupations is this. This is unemployment over a long period of time. And what you can see is that if you are in a creativity-oriented occupation, no matter how bad the economy gets, unemployment doesn't get over 4%. Right. Whereas if you're in a routine-oriented occupation, unemployment never gets down to 4%. Right? So not only are the wages dramatically lower in routine-oriented occupations, the unemployment is consistently way higher. So in the best of times, unemployment is about 3% higher than in creativity-oriented occupations. In the worst of time, it's 7 or 8% higher. So a real challenge. The other thing that I think is important to know in this modern economy that's valuing analytical and social intelligence skills to a greater extent, the importance of early childhood development are ever more clear and manifest. And this is work by Richard Heckman, who's a Nobel laureate, on what's the payoff to education at various stages. And the payoff to education in 0 to 3 development at that age has massive payoff, and unfortunately, job training post school post-formal education has the lowest payoff. So one of the things in this modern economy that we have to think very carefully about is making sure that we don't let people fall through the cracks early, because this economy, the economy that we're heading in, is going to punish them ever more economically. They'll be in occupations and industries that do not provide a particularly good future for them, low wages and high threat of being unemployed. So to get back to Ontario, what we told the Premier is that our agenda for the creative age, which may bear some similarities to agendas for other jurisdictions, has these four pieces to it. One, we need to broaden our talent base. So currently, of 18 to 24-year-olds in the province of Ontario, 40% of them get post-secondary education, which is actually pretty good by international and North American standards. But it turns out that 70% of the jobs that are going to be created in the next 25 years are going to require post-secondary education. Right? So think about it. We're putting out 40% who are going to compete for 70% of the jobs. What's going to happen to the wage rates in those jobs? They'll go up. And we've got 60% who are going to compete for 30% of the jobs. What's going to happen there? Wages are going to go down. And this, unfortunately, is a function, a situation that exists in all of the developed economies. All of the developed economies are educating their populace, their 18 to 24-year-olds, to a lower extent than is required for the jobs that are coming. Right? And we're all worried. We're saying all these jobs are going to go to India and China, or going to get competition from India and China. Yeah, they for sure are, when half or more of our kids do not get a stick of post-secondary education. So the dirty little secret of the North American economy. All the people in this room, right, are surrounded by people who have post-secondary education. That's not actually the situation writ large in this country or my country. So one of the challenges we put to the Premier is to get participation rate up to 60%, so that attainment gets up to 70%. With people going back to school and immigration, attainment, whether you have post-secondary education, is about 10 points higher than participation rate of 18 to 24-year-olds. So we've got to have a 50% increase from 40 to 60 in that over the next 30 years, or we will be making sure that we have an underclass of underemployed kids who are now 18 to 24 and in 20 years are going to be 38 to 44 and will have if they're lucky, a low-paying job that has high unemployment prospects. So that's broaden our talent base. Harness the creative potential of Ontarians. It is very clear that the creativity content of jobs is directly related to their pay, the pay levels, and the employability, whether or not there's unemployment. And what we think has got to happen is we have to take those routine-oriented jobs and make them more creativity-oriented. A big task. But as long as we make them algorithmic and routine, they are going to be competed away by low-cost jurisdictions. I mean, we can cry about that or do something about it, and I think the only way to do something about it is to, one, broaden the talent base, and two, make sure that talent base is being used constructively. Establish new social safety nets. We think the social safety nets that have been created have been 20th century social safety nets, welfare, food stamps, etc. All of those sort of social safety net programs are going to be less and less effective in the 21st century. The biggest social safety net we can provide is early childhood education, especially for disadvantaged kids, and then making sure kids stay in school. So the dropout rates out of high school are scandalous across your country and ours. Our province did a brave thing a couple of years ago. They made it illegal to drop out of high school. Yeah, you have to stay in high school till you're 18, or an approved apprenticeship program. Full stop. Used to be 16. It's now 18, which is high school graduation rate. That is a modern social safety net, because if we let them drop out of high school, they have, exceptional characters who drop out of high school will do okay, but the vast majority of them will be poor for the rest of their life and have long bouts of unemployment. So better early childhood education, more thorough childhood education, and making sure that we keep people in school through high school, so they have a chance of getting the post-secondary education that 70% of them will need to get down jobs. And then finally, and this maybe is more of an Ontario thing, build province-wide geographic advantage by investing in linking up the province to a better extent. We don't have what's happening in the world is that all the economic activity of consequence is moving it to mega clusters, mega regions that are building these spiky industries. Thomas Friedman wrote this wonderful book called The World is Flat. Unfortunately, the world is doing exactly the opposite. It's absolutely crystal clear that the world is getting spikier, not flatter. And if you have towns that are not connected to a big mega region, they're going to do badly, and there's few prospects for them. And so, and that's the case for Ontario. We haven't done a good job of connecting them. High-speed rail, lower commuting time to get to the heart of Ontario, which is Toronto. And so that fourth one I would say is a little more Ontario specific, but I would argue that all jurisdictions in North America and elsewhere have to think about the other three. So those are my thoughts from the study, and I'd be happy to discuss it with Matthew or take questions. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Matthew Bishop. I'm New York bureau chief of The Economist, and I think I've been asked to kick off a discussion with Roger, partly to bring some English impartiality to this battle between Canada and the USA over who's got the better workforce and the better policies for creativity. But also, I'm fascinated by this analysis. And I guess what we're debating a lot about at the moment within The Economist is to what extent any of these trends that we've observed for the last 20 years are actually inevitable at all. And given the economic world we're moving into, where perhaps America's going to become more like Canada in terms of heavy taxation and a national health service and all that kind of thing, is this whole trend of inequality of creative people getting more and more of the income going to continue, or is that actually going to change dramatically now? I
think it might get interrupted for a short period, but as I look at the numbers and as my colleague Richard Florida does, I would, if I were a betting man, I'd bet that it will ameliorate, just like executive compensation did for about a year and a half after the .com bust, and then started heading up again. I would predict it will continue to head up towards more creativity-oriented jobs, more spikiness, more challenge to people who do not live in a mega region or work in a clustered industry and creativity-oriented job.
Let me push you a bit more on that. You said that the unemployment rate amongst the creative workers, never rose above 4%. I think certainly maybe living in New York exaggerates that, but clearly the publishing industry and the financial services industry is in sort of massive layoff mode. I could certainly see the rate temporarily rising above 4%. Do you think there's something about what is it that makes you so confident that the rate stays low? It is conceivable. We only took that back for about 25 years, and it's conceivable that the unemployment rate will get worse than it did in 1992, 93, and so maybe it may go higher. But my
my prediction is that when we look back at this period, however long this downturn is going to be, and look at the unemployment rates, there'll be this huge differential, and I bet the differential between unemployment in routine versus creativity-oriented will be 6 to 8 points. Now, maybe if it's bad enough and down enough, the creativity-oriented will be 5 or 6% or something. But I think the differential will be there, because again, remember, in financial services there are creativity-oriented job classifications and routine-oriented job classifications, and I bet my bottom dollar that there's as many people being laid off in the routine-oriented as there are in the creativity-oriented, even in that sector.
Yeah, I suppose it's interesting that if you do get a massive slowdown that now seems increasingly likely, and unemployment rising to say 10 or 11% for the population as a whole, that a lot of those jobs are certainly going to come out of the service sector by definition because it's so big. Yeah. Because it's so big. Yeah. And I guess there's a sort of sense in which people who are creative are not necessarily going to be able just to switch into the routine service jobs. They'll seem overqualified and so forth. And so I suppose my worry would be that that actually this is the first time you do see the creative class really suffer. And I wonder, in terms of stimulus packages and things of that kind, we've no experience of using stimulus money to either push service jobs in general or indeed the creative class into work. I don't know, if you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I guess my reading of the history of stimulus packages is they mainly kind of stimulate after the economy has fixed itself. So I'm not holding my breath waiting for this stimulus package or our stimulus package to kind of do the trick. But I do think, I still think, and this is one of the things that we argue in this report, we're still far too much oriented towards saving manufacturing jobs. And I think, and now everybody writes me emails telling me that I shouldn't be so anti-manufacturing. I'm not. I'm just it is mythology that manufacturing jobs are better, and and somehow we can't all work in services. Again, over the last 50 years in America, manufacturing output has gone up 7 times, and manufacturing employment has gone down by a half. So we're not making stuff. We're just making stuff really efficiently. And if you'd have told anybody at the turn of the century in America, guess what? There's only going to be 2% of people working in agriculture. Everybody would have said, "Oh my God, we'll be importing all of our food, right? 100% of our food. I mean, this will be a disaster, and we'll be vulnerable to people cutting off our food supply." But America's a major exporter of agricultural products. So I think, that's a little bit of a sidelight, but I think in stimulus packages of the sort we have, there's more of a focus on saving a kind of jobs that isn't more important to the economy than a whole lot of higher end service jobs, and that I guess I worry somewhat about. But I'm who knows? I guess if I got a get out of jail card that says you can spend as much as you want now, I guess maybe I'd do that too. But $800 billion seems like a lot.
So it is a lot.
Last time I checked.
Yeah. The car industry obviously is one of those industries that clusters and actually spans the border. And how does Canada view the bailout debate for the car industry, and how do you think about, because obviously there are, as you say, some very creative workers in the car industry. How does that all play out as a strategy?
Well, it is of great interest, not so much to Canada as a whole as to Ontario, because those jobs are so focused in Ontario. There used to be more of them in Quebec. There's fewer of them in Quebec now. So it's of huge interest to Ontario. And since Ontario is 40% of the Canadian economy, it is then of interest to folks in Ottawa. So there was pretty much in Canada an immediate response that if they do the bailout, we'll do our part. And that has in fact happened. There's equivalent bailout money being provided in Canada under similar, relatively similar arrangements. It certainly would be, it would be really painful for the Ontario economy if the car companies went down. Although Ontario has been the beneficiary of a number of Asian import plants, so big Honda, big Toyota, Hyundai. So Ontario, in that respect, is more like the U.S. Right-to-work southern states that have gotten the Japanese and Korean plants. So that would ameliorate it a little bit.
I'm going to throw it open to questions in a moment, but two other questions from me. One, how much is the fact that you have more of the creative workers in a particular industry in America compared to Canada due to the different tax policies between the two countries, the fact that you're able to get richer and pay less tax in America than in Canada?
The interesting thing for me on that front is that the tax. I don't think it's personal tax rates. I used to, and then I actually analyzed it and looked at the numbers, and it just the major locuses of the creative class in America are in states where the differential in personal income taxation, when you add up states and federal, just isn't very different. So I don't think that you have a creative class impact of a 5 or 6% difference in marginal tax rates in Ontario versus New York, Ontario versus California, Ontario versus Illinois, Ontario versus Massachusetts. So I used to think that there was a real brain drain problem between Canada and the U.S. that was based on tax rates. But when you look and ask how much money are you actually talking about, the answer is not much. What the big problem is that I think the U.S. economy has tuned itself. It's at an equilibrium that uses a higher level of resource. So there are way more people with graduate degrees per capita in the U.S. than Canada, about 2x. And that's because industry utilizes them. And so what you see is that the big difference between Canada and the U.S. is not in after-tax, the difference between pre-tax and after-tax income. It's all in the difference between pre-tax income, and that's a function of the U.S. economy using skilled labor more intensively and getting more out of it than they get out of Canada. And I think that has to do a lot with the worst mistake Canada made economically in its history, which is in 1878. It decided that you people were nasty, and that unless we protected our industries, they were going to be overrun by Americans. And so we were going to protect our infant industries, and we declared them to be infant for 111 years. And we got used to not innovating and instead watching what went on in America and then doing whatever they did in Canada. And it doesn't take as highly skilled people if you're just watching what they do and then replicating it behind a massive tariff wall. And so that's more. I've come to believe that it's not marginal effective tax rates on personal income. It is a history of industrial organization that caused us to use talent less intensively, and we've got to work on using talent more intensively and asking for a greater amount of talent in our businesses to get our wages and productivity and innovation up to the level it is in the U.S. You're not more high-tech oriented. If you add up, so here's a quiz, a little quiz.
Mm-hmm.
You're
not asking me.
No, I'm asking all them people. It says yes. add up the following sectors of the U.S. economy: computer, hardware and software, telecommunications, hardware and software, biotech, pharma and biotech, medical devices, aerospace, vehicles and aerospace engines, right? I've added up all of high tech together. What percentage of your jobs in the American economy are in those sectors? Any guesses? 7? 5? 12? Yeah. People would generally guess between 7 and 20%. It's 1.76. In Canada, it is lower. It's 1.64. So if we had as many high-tech jobs as America had, we'd have 3,500 more jobs in all of Canada. So we're not less tech-oriented than the U.S. We do the same things that the American economy does, but we do them tuned to a lower level of use of talent and at a lower level of innovation.
So I'm tempted, having sort of watched all the news coverage of America's CEOs grabbing bonuses in Wall Street and flying to Washington from Detroit to beg for federal bailouts and so forth, to wonder how you define social intelligence if they come top of the list.
That's what I said.
And what test you did that showed the difference between them and models in terms of social intelligence. But instead, I'm actually going to ask, my last question before I throw it open will be, you've mapped out this competitive strategy for Ontario, but who do you see as your competitors? I mean, is it really America now, or is it parts of America, or is it Europe, or is it Asia? I mean, what did you map out the different competitors and their strategies and so forth?
Yeah, yeah. It kind of depends on how you look at it. I do think that America, in many respects, is the most important competitor, partially because now 88% of our trade goes to America, and America is the richest jurisdiction of any consequential size on the face of the planet, and so I think there are lessons to be learned from that. There are only 3 jurisdictions of any consequential size outside of America that are any higher in prosperity than Ontario. The little region around Munich, the little region around Frankfurt, and the little region around the northern Italy, and only a couple $1,000s in GDP higher. So I tend to say I'm not sure there's a whole lot to learn from them about how a jurisdiction like Ontario should do better. Now, in terms of competition, there's clearly, I think anybody who doesn't think about India and China now and Brazil is probably not being very intelligent. So thinking about competition in a different fashion, but it's more how can we accentuate and gain value from the differences and a different strategy rather than what can we learn from the strategy is more the question. But I'm interested in what can we learn from Massachusetts' education strategy, what can we learn from California's innovation strategy. A bunch of those things are. What can we learn about Georgia and North Carolina about pulling their economies up by their bootstraps? Those are some of the things I'm probably most keenly interested in.
Great. Well, let's throw it open to questions and comments. If you just say who you are, there should be a mic coming to you. There's a gentleman on the right.
Yes. Hello. My name is Nick Dahlheim. I'm thinking about the inevitability of the move toward creative jobs, and some of the realities. I mean, the United States, in particular, and Canada, a little bit less so, have relied heavily on our treasure of fossil fuels, which, according to the latest IEA reports, are actually in pretty severe trouble, and we're facing a major climate catastrophe. Should we be thinking more on the lines of what can we do to shore up ourselves locally in our local resource bases in a resource-constrained future, and how can we utilize the physical labor that's going to be necessary to actually do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the great challenges of the modern economy is to become less fossil fuel intensive really fast. And so, I mean, I guess I think of it as a huge opportunity, opportunity for lots of creativity and creative talent being applied to the challenge. So I don't disagree. I think it's one of the great challenges of our era, and you know, we can argue in Canada we have vast fossil fuel resources, vast more than Saudi Arabia. But if you go up there and look at what has to happen to get them out, you're just left shaking your head, right? The amount of energy that has to go in, the amount of more water that has to go in to get a barrel of that stuff, it just makes. I mean, it makes. I look at it and say, nah, you know, it might be there, but I can't believe that that's good for us long term. So I'm inclined to say it's one of the great challenges. But I mean, here's where I'm forever the optimist. I mean, I believe in human creativity. I mean, on that front, I may be being overly interventionist, but I wish like heck when oil prices were up at 140, we as Canadians or Americans too, would have just said, okay, we're going to create a carbon tax that taxes oil as if it's $150 a barrel. And the carbon tax is going to be the difference between the trading price of oil and $150. And so we would have $10 carbon tax per barrel, and we'd have utter consistency. So everybody who's investing in energy-saving devices and alternative energy sources could just absolutely assume $150. It's just going to be I'm going to get paid off at a $150 rate essentially for every gallon of oil I save, because what's happened now is that everybody who was gearing up for alternative energy and alternative devices and whatever now says, oh, darn, oil prices are way down, and business likes nothing better than a stable environment for investment. And so I kind of wish now it would be suicidal for people to do that, because for politicians to do that. I don't think it would have been suicidal when oil prices were as high, and we kind of blew an opportunity.
Okay.
My name is Bill Waitman. I'm with the New Jersey State Government, Department of Labor, and I see tragedy every day with loss of jobs, including some of those creative jobs. We have people from the financial sector in northwestern New Jersey, about 40 miles from here. But my question is, National Academy of Science reports in the United States have called for science, technology, engineering, and math in schools all the way up. Inner city kids fall off the map; they're not getting them, and we're not very competitive in those industries. How do you see us turning that around on a competitive stage? And by the way, New Jersey used to be the medicine chest of the world, and we've lost a great share of our capability in that arena.
Well, my beloved colleague Rich is from New Jersey. He grew up in, as you may know, Richard Florida grew up in New Jersey and is fond of New Jersey. I mean, I'm a bit contrarian on STEM: science, technology, engineering, math. I mean, the way I see it, the trial lawyers have got the absolutely best lobby in Washington. Absolutely, they're magic. And the second best lobby is the STEM lobby, and a whole bunch of the facts that it throws around just aren't. I mean, I've done the analysis of is there any correlation between prosperity or growth in prosperity across the world with absolute numbers of STEM graduates per year, or percentage of your graduates that are in the STEM disciplines, or whatever. And there isn't. And so and there's this whole argument that says we don't have enough, and we'll be overwhelmed by Chinese and Indian engineers. And there was going around for several years. Bill Gates was quoting it. George Bush was quoting it. 600,000 engineers per year produced by China, 325,000 produced by India, and 89,000 produced by America. It turns out a couple of Duke professors sort of said this Duke engineering professors said this doesn't sound right, and kind of did this huge analysis to get to the bottom of it, and it turned out it all came from a Fortune reporter who finally was willing to admit, I just made them up. And it turns out the only way you get to 600,000 in China is by including people who did a 2-week course on fixing lawnmowers. So the numbers just don't demonstrate to me that we are short of producing science and technology graduates. People say their numbers are shrinking. They're not, right? It's stated as a fact. There are fewer of them. They're not. Right? If you pick the right base year, and there's one base year you can pick in one discipline, so computer engineering, and you pick the base year 2000, you can get a decline. But that's it. Right? That's the only way you can get a decline in any of these statistics. So I'm not convinced it's the panacea of the problem. Now, that having been said, I do believe that having crummy science and math teaching in schools that causes kids to drop out that would have otherwise gone through, that's not what we want, and I'd care about that. But the hysteria. I mean, look at who comes out with these gathering storms, right? That was the most ridiculous piece of work I've seen in a long time. A bunch of scientists saying science is really important. Yeah, duh. I mean, they're going to say that. They need some facts behind it. But I digress.
So there's a lady over here on the left. Yeah. No, there's a lady in front of you, sir. Thanks. We'll come to you next.
My name is Sharissa Fernandez. I'm with the After School Corporation, and I'm interested in your views on education. You spoke about the importance of early childhood, but you also mentioned that the emphasis on education is not on the social intelligence skills. So I'm just curious what your recommendations are in that regard.
Well, I don't have a whole lot yet, because this is sort of like, there's always, whenever I do one of these big studies where you study stuff that you don't know anything about yet, stuff pops out, and this was one of the ones that really popped out for me, and it's got me kind of all shaken up about what we teach, and so I mean I do think that we've got to ask the question, what are the bodies of knowledge about social intelligence that we have to build, because you got to teach things that are, I guess I'm thinking at the university level, well, any level, you got to teach things that are rigorously understood, and you can't just say be socially intelligent. You'd have to, create curricula for it. But I was just struck by going through our own program, and I'm very proud of our own program, our great MBA school and everything. But I have to say, analysis. It's weighted dramatically in that direction. And again, that might be right. Maybe that's what we can do, and they get their social intelligence skills elsewhere. But I'm sort of thinking that if they're so darn important, can't we get organized on that front? So I wish I had lots more intelligent to say on it, but this is one of these where I'm just starting the rumination on what the heck does this mean, and if you got ideas on it from the programs that you're running, I can promise you I'm all ears.
And what for you is the defining question that you use to identify whether someone has social intelligence?
Well, this was not so much identifying whether a person has it or not. It's what the requirements of jobs are. So we took the 800 jobs and did this analysis. And the social intelligence skills are skills like creating teams, collaboration, getting people organized to do things, as well as sort of the basic interpersonal. Can you communicate with another person? And it's an array of skills that we call, and maybe social intelligence. That's just the name we hung on it, but it's that kind of a set of skills.
Okay, gentleman there.
Thank you, Jeffrey Milton, the fellow of the association. As a strategic advisor to GM, you probably have to expect a question like this, but there was a rather provocative headline in one of the lunchtime's reports about, if I can read it, if GM gets much smaller, won't it be too big to fail anymore? And as a result, I think they announced 10,000 layoffs today. How can the big three respond to the challenge of the creative age, or is it just too late?
Yeah, so you have to take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm conflicted on this, as the gentleman indicates. I have, for the last 3 years, been working with General Motors to try and help them with their turnaround strategy. The auto companies are an interesting blend of kind of past and future skills and skill sets, and so if you look at the top 25 R&D companies in the world, you'll see Ford and GM on that list, and everybody say, you got to be kidding me! It shouldn't just be kind of HP and IBM and a bunch of tech companies. No, it's those and Daimler and maybe even BMW might be on. I forget, but. It is an industry that does an enormous amount of R&D and has enormous creativity-oriented occupations in it. So it would be a shame to lose it from that sense. Why I think GM has got a shot at making it through. It's by no means a sure thing, but I think it's got a shot. And one of the reasons is because it's got the most enviable footprint in the world outside America and Japan. So if you exclude America and Japan and say who's got the best kind of position in the market, otherwise it's General Motors, and they are depending on how you count it, either 8 or 9 of the 10 top markets in the world are number one in market share. America is a disaster for them that will take an enormous amount of fixing for a whole bunch of historical reasons that mainly have to do with the way they forged a relationship or lack thereof with the United Auto Workers and what they gave away in various rounds to avoid bigger fights than they otherwise had. But I think what I've been arguing in Detroit is getting much more precise about how they target vehicles for markets and make every vehicle a very purposeful vehicle rather than just another vehicle. And if they do that, they have successful vehicles. And if you look at the last series of launches, they've been successful. They just have to do that all the time across the board. I have a hard time, in truth, seeing how the Chrysler that was left over after Daimler is positioned to survive, because it's got a North American only footprint and truck and minivan centric. That's a toughie, and Ford is somewhere in between, with not as good a global footprint but a better financial situation, and a CEO who seems to be doing a good job getting big important vehicles that people like out. So I said before, I'm an unabashed optimist, and so I dive in on anything, and I'm optimistic, and I think there is a shot, but it ain't going to be easy.
I think we have one more question. Time for one more question, gentleman in the middle there. Yeah.
Yes, hi, my name is Steve Brandt, and I work in international development with the UN Global Compact, Corporate Social Responsibility. I'd like to ask you about the World Economic Forum at Davos. And the Economist had an essay called Mountain Reboot, which claimed that the challenge we face is that the global economic system is like a crashed computer. And I wrote an essay in response to that on the Huffington Post called Mountain Redesign, because I think we need the economic system to be designed for a world that's interdependent and sustainability-based rather than Darwinian competition and constant consumption-based. So I'd like your thoughts on whether we are faced with a crashed computer, or are we in a car that's actually on the ocean and we really need to be in a boat?
I think that's too hard a question. I mean, this gentleman has many views on corporate social responsibility too. So I'll say a few things, and you should respond. I guess I wrote a book recently about often trying to look past the either or choices, and that's what I'd say on that one. It's not so much an either or choice. I think there's a kind of a bit of both. I don't think we want to lose the wonderful aspect of competition, the wonderful aspect that competition brings, but I think we also need a greater sense of social responsibility. The thing to think about competition is the best training companies can get. Companies do badly when they aren't trained by competition. The big three had trouble because they weren't sufficiently trained by competition for long enough when they had an oligopoly. Public utilities have real problems because they don't get trained by competition. So I like competition. But as for corporate social responsibility, I guess I see a couple things. One is consumers have to lead, right? And one of the other things I did in my old life is I consulted, and I still do consult to Procter & Gamble. And I was involved with something about 15 years ago where they decided to really get on packaging aggressively, and they created these for liquid Tide. They created these thin film replacements. So you bought the bottle of liquid Tide the first time, and after that you did these really, and they did great engineering on them. They were thin film packets. You had to snip the corner and pour it into your other bottle, and it had 1/10 the footprint. And they did a whole bunch of other things, but that's exemplifying it. What happened? Consumers would not go to the irritating length of actually snipping the corner off something and pouring it into something else, right? And they had to actually, they actually had to sell them all at a discount off the shelf to get rid of it. And if you then said to anybody at Procter & Gamble for the next 10 years, we really got to get on packaging because that's really important to the world, they'd say, yeah, but consumers aren't there. So consumers are there now, I think, right, to a much greater extent, and I think consumers will drive a greater level of sustainability. But unless they drive, it's never happened, and it won't happen going forward. That having been said, I think a bunch of corporations can do more leading, and I wrote an article on this, if you're interested, called The Virtue Matrix, a number of years ago, which argued that I don't think we have good enough models for corporations that think intelligently about social responsibility. And so I think, in part, the theories about how to think about it have to develop. Corporations have to be more aggressive in following, and consumers have to keep pushing harder, because consumers can get whatever they damn well please. Right? That is the argument. They do. But if they're ambivalent, right? Scandinavian consumers for a long time have been willing to blow their noses in brown tissues because they realize that the worst part of making paper products is that final little stage of bleaching. And it's the most environmental degradation comes from that one thing. And they'd say, you know what, toilet paper, facial tissues, baby diapers, they can be brown. They'll be okay. North American consumers, no way, right? And so we have a huge difference. Consumers can drive all of this. But you know more about this.
Well, thank you. I will take my opportunity to plug my own book.
Yeah.
I've just written a book called Philanthrocapitalism, which is actually making the case for what the social contract should be between business and the rich and the rest of society. And I've just written a piece on Huffington Post about the discussion of that took place at the World Economic Forum. And I actually did write the Mountain Reboot piece as well, anonymously in The Economist. Just very briefly, I think that it was interesting at the World Economic Forum how many people were looking for something optimistic to take out of what was quite a depressed rightly depressed gathering. And a lot of the optimism came from this is actually a chance to sort of rebuild a business and in fact social entrepreneurship on a more sustainable basis where I think both a lot of green policies were being talked about, but also I think there was, at least in some parts, a discussion of the ethical failures that had taken place and whether certainly short-termism had been a massive folly and a cause of many of the problems. Now, that may have just been the conversation that took place because the climate was so grim at the moment in the world economy. But I think that I felt that at least some of that was sincerely meant and that people were trying to think through how they could take that away and actually put it into practice. But I guess that will remain to be seen. I'll be optimistic like you and assume that some of that will change, because I think people saw their own... I mean, a lot of people have obviously been shaken up in business by what's gone on, and how many people who thought they were running a sustainable business have found that they were facing extinction because of things that were beyond their control and where people were behaving in a very short-termist way, particularly in the financial markets. So I think they don't want to be exposed to those risks and those short-term pressures again.
No, I'd agree.
But anyway, on that note, I feel bad taking the last word.
No, I thought it was very appropriate.
Okay, well, on that note, I'd like to thank you very much for being very, very fascinating.
Thank you.